I'm Josh Anglesea, and I'm going to go ahead and talk you through an idea around the customer or vendor self-service portals. It's much more of a spin on this towards a Power Platform, but I want to sort of step through what self-service portals end up looking like and maybe some of the other options that are over there as well. So I am a solutions consultant and I work for Expedition in the UK. Let's get ourselves on. Okay, so some typical uses of portals and what am I trying to get at with this session overall. So if we think about business to business type relationships, which probably take up a huge cluster of projects that we end up catering for with Business Central especially, these are kind of some of the high level things that people might use a portal for. So B2B type relationships, you would want to maybe let certain customers be able to log orders because it's a high volume type business and you're trying to distribute your time to other things. There might be a tendency or needs to be able to let them do some data input or editing type facilities. So think about a supplier type relationship where you might want them to be able to pass over some details around dates for purchase receipts, something of that nature. General task performance, so there might actually be something that they need to input on, but potentially I think we probably see that a little bit ourselves at the moment with regards to projects, at least, and there's a need to have certain tasks performed on different sets of data from different businesses. Overall, I think it does speed up the administration process. You think around the fact that, okay, you're giving someone access to go ahead and do some of the bits and pieces which they do help the overall cogs of the business move, and it's taking something away from somebody else and giving us that self-service methodology. Probably a classic one here would be support ticket systems. We have that for our support desk ourselves at Expedition, so we do have a dedicated portal that people log on to. But then, the other thing is kind of frequently asked questions type way of looking at things. I worked on a project for service management one time, and they actually had like a knowledge base which people would go over to, and it was, again, only certain types of businesses had access to it, and it was its own sort of exclusive portal framework. So let's then think about what are the actual options that you could have for Business Central. And I've kind of cut this up as simply as possible. Maybe I'm missing some, but here are what I'm thinking right now. So a specialist portal platform, that could be something like Sana, for instance. I've seen that used in a few circumstances. Good third-party product. Can be a little bit more on the pricey side to have a specialist portal platform. So thinking about a business which is going to be high volume, then that will probably be something you'd want to potentially go for because you can ensure that the performance is going to be as you require it to. Power Apps portals is something that's kind of available in the overall Microsoft stack. So of course we've got to give a nod to that. I think I found with that one, with that particular suggestion, is that it's quite expensive when you really think about the licensing elements for it. And there's kind of two different types of portals. So you can have one where you're kind of like you anonymously log on to it, so there's kind of like a regular website type of situation. But then you also have the authenticated type, which is meant to be for a lesser amount of people. But there's like a banding for the pricing on if you've got maybe 10 to 20, it's a little bit cheaper, but then if you've got like 500 to 1,000 people logging onto it, then it becomes radically more expensive. And in conversations with prospects, if people aren't even customers yet, when we've dropped this into the equation, because it's there, you can't ignore these things, it does often come out as being a little bit too pricey. That's an obvious negative point that I'm mentioning there, so let's not forget positive points. It's really really configurable actually. It's very easy to drop onto that kind of overall promise with Power Platform being the low and no code, and it certainly does deliver on those parts, but it also lets kind of more pro devs, especially on web platform side, have some facilities to drop in bits that they know about. So it's kind of a best of both worlds in that sense. A SharePoint site, so maybe not everybody's first idea, but it's definitely there as a framework to go with. And again, that can be a little bit more restrictive on the types of pages and apps that you have within SharePoint, because it's pretty much an exclusive list. Over there, if you've got really good pro dev capabilities in that, you can do quite some as well. But more and more these days, it seems to be, for people who are like legacy SharePointers, more and more seem to be leaning on using Power Platforms to kind of leverage and make the UI look a little bit nicer and do some different bits and pieces. So it might well be that probably maybe a little bit more work involved in getting that as you want it to be, and naturally there is a licensing standpoint on that one as well. So the type of SharePoint site that you need would require a certain banding of license. So you can kind of hear an overall arching theme here with regards to where I might be going with these things, but licensing does play a factor because it's another cost for people to think about. When you initially start talking to customers, they just want to know what's it going to cost me per month and keep it really simple. And when you start layering in more and more software, more and more platforms, it starts to creak that conversation a little bit. Custom web platforms. So what we're talking about there, things like Shopify have a B2B element that you can go for. I've seen customers build it on sort of WordPress sites as well. And they're good platforms. Of course, they are. They're fit for purpose. Unless you've got the skills in-house to cater for those, it can be a little bit of a different thing. You've got to partner up with somebody else potentially and get them involved. So all of a sudden you made your project a little bit more complicated in terms of stakeholders than you intended to. And then our kind of last one over there is, and this one can be a little bit of a harder push just because of the fact that there's going to be quite some permissions to be dealt with over here. But it's lateral thinking. Business Central is our product of choice, so why not potentially look at a team member license? I had quite a good conversation with a customer where they were actually thinking about going down this road because of the fact that they could charge out to their customers the price of the license, and then it was cost covered, which is great. And they were all on one platform. If an internal user had to go and have a look at something, it wasn't too bad to do because they could just be in Business Central, nice and easy. Like I say, though, the security filters needed for that to really go through is completely necessary. Kind of locking down all tables just to, let's think about it from a customer standpoint. It will be every customer focused table where the customer number exists, making sure that it only looks at their customer number. So yeah, it's definitely there. It's a possibility, but it does involve a cost and the kind of ongoing maintenance of it as and when new people adopt it. It could be a little bit more than what you're looking for. The external accountant aspect, okay, it's a little bit more restrictive again, and for exclusive tasks and data that they're looking at, it's probably okay. And you get a certain amount of those for free when you've got a certain amount of Business Central Essentials licenses. So yeah, there's still some things to go on with that. The one that I'm really going to go for, though, is to do with using Teams. Okay, and these are some of the prerequisites of doing it in that way. I'm going really simple with my example just to make it easier to explain, and there's definitely minimal scope on using Teams for some of these activities. But I have a real focus scenario when it comes to demo time, not all just going to be about slides, thankfully. And yeah, you'll maybe then start to get where I'm coming from potentially with this one. And you probably do this a little bit already with some of your clients. If they have teams, then this is a thing you could go for. So you can use guest accounts within your tenants. This is much more of a kind of SaaS focused solution, I suppose, in that sense. You've got to have it enabled so that guest accounts can use Teams. And we'll see when we log in as a user who's on a different tenant, how that starts to sort of play out for them. But to ensure you're restricting this in the right kind of way, because we need to, of course, we need to make sure that they're not able to get to more places than we were kind of intending for them to be. And you could cut this up in a few different ways, of course. Could be that you had a channel, Teams channel, for your different clientele. Now, again, that could get a little bit on the tricky side to maintain in the longer term standpoint. Or you could just look to have one channel, possibly, one for customers, one for vendors, and then you can make sure that you've done enough in your app to restrict down what they can see. And I've got some facilities to show that when we get to that particular point. So creating a group in Azure, in the Azure portal, you can then say, okay, it's just this particular team that this user belongs to. So we'll jump on to the Microsoft 365 admin center, and you'll kind of see a little bit of how that goes. I think I've got a screen grab actually of it in the slide deck. And then it's a case of, do you want them to have a channel, or do you want them to have channels when they're available in Teams? And that again boils back down to what scope that particular Azure group has for the user. And you could, of course, have multiple groups in there, and each group could have its own different channel. That's the method I've gone for in this instance, just again to keep it a little bit more transparent on what's going on. So over on the admin center, this is what the kind of look and feel of this would be. So you do have a defined guest users area. I need to go to it anyway to show you another part, so I will do that when we drop into sort of demo type section. But here we go. We've got our dedicated user, different tenant. So Deborah Berger is going to be the person we're going to do most of our bits and pieces with when we're doing a functional sort of show and tell type demo. And then we'll jump into the world of my main user, who will then be able to illustrate to you how we got to the result. And we can see one of our red boxes there is highlighting the different groups that they're part of. So business to business is its own group, and that one then is the channel in Teams that they're going to have access to. And you can see the top red box there is actually telling me that guests have access to Teams, and that's just a small configuration that you need to make on the tenant to enable that one. And you'll be able to let them create them over here, give them the different groups, and then they will be able to log in as needed. Now you'll kind of also see on that particular screen grab right now is two email addresses, and I've highlighted the one in red there in the middle of the screen. That's their actual email address. But over on the user card, you'll see that there's a small convoluted one over there as well. Now we won't be using that one when it comes to email messaging, because that's not actually their email address. But why is that there? What does it mean? Why should we care? Well, that's actually to do with how you can send them Teams messages. So when they're a guest user, you can still message them, but that's the address that actually gets used when that process takes place. So we were thinking about building out some sort of maybe Power Automate flow, which actually passed them over a message. That's the address that we'd have to use, not the main email address, because we're not part of their tenant in this scenario. We can't pass messages in that way. What is my demo scenario? Well, it is focused on customer. and kind of cleverly with my title said it would be customer or vendor. So you will have to forgive me that I won't be doing vendor in this particular presentation today, but I'm wanting to give you enough of a flavour and consideration for how that could be catered for. I think this one will give us what we need for now. So we're going to go ahead and let the guest user that we just saw have the ability to sort of view and review top-level financial information. So we're thinking about the balance currently on their account, the balance due on their account. And we'll also let them have some editing capability. So we'll have the address detail and who the current preferred email contact is, postcode, things of that nature. So they'll actually be able to do some maintenance of their own data in the application. And we'll go ahead and then pass that back in to Business Central. And I'll tell you about the sort of quirks and nuances with that taking place, because naturally this user will not have access to Business Central directly. It's all just done within the focus of Teams, and Teams will have Dataverse available to it. So all the data that we work with is going to be in Dataverse. And I'll have to, of course, explain to you how that data got there and how it gets back out again. So we will see that one. And then last thing that we'll get with this little crude app in Teams is the ability to see previous invoices. And we'll go ahead and be able to pass off and email copies of those. I didn't get it quite working in time to do a direct export or a preview, but I think that's something that we could probably look to see in the future. Okay, so that's that section of slides done, and we can think about demo. So this, the Edge session that I've got open is for the Deborah Berger user. We can see in our top corner over here. Okay. And this is a completely different tenant entirely. And this is her currently logged into her main tenant. She's got various different channels on the go there, and messages and such like. You probably recognize this from your own Teams sessions potentially. This is a drop down to actually say, log me into a different environment to work with. We can already see quite nicely there that she is marked as a guest in that one. So we will log into the other environment and let that get cooking. And whilst it is, we'll go into our other sessions. So this is the principal tenant that I want to work with. This is my Chrome browser session, and I am logged in as a user called Eve Smith in this instance. So totally different environment. As kind of promised in our Microsoft Admin Center, here's my guest users setup, and I've gone ahead and clicked on the Manage Team Settings, just that I can bring up this box for you over here, just so you can get an idea. Okay, that's is pretty much as simple as it ends up getting with regards to enabling this on the tenant. And that's, of course, a prerequisite that will be handled in advance. Other than that, you'll see my sort of Deborah Berger guest user here. She has no licenses assigned to her whatsoever. So the scope of what she can do is purely down to what we've given her access to from a group standpoint. So on the Azure portal over here, I'm just showing the business-to-business group which I've defined, and from a overall scope of what the user can do, these are the things that they've been granted a level of access to. So we will be able to fire some emails over. There is some, of course, access to SharePoint, mostly because like documents and such like that are saved in Teams happen to actually be stored in SharePoint, of course. So it's kind of a blurred line between the two. But it's the Teams one that we're really keen on, of course, because that's where we can do most of our stuff. So nicely, we've managed to, or I've managed to talk long enough so that it's logged into the other environment. So straight away you can see, she's not got access to a whole raft really. So we've just said it's the business to business teams channel, and there happens to be a section in there called general, and that's about as far as it goes. So I kind of get, as a bit of a long reach, you'd have to have a little bit of discipline if you were to say, oh, okay, one group, one channel, and then I let multiple people log into it. Then okay, conversations and such like, you might want to kind of keep that on the down low, but there is still capability that user can go ahead and do things like that. It might be that you store some files over here as well, just with explanations on how to work with certain things. That could all just be dropped into this section as necessary. But let's think about our apps and our actual access to information, which is from Business Central. So I have devised a Teams Canvas app, which is built on Teams Dataverse. And if I click on this tab over here, it should, with a bit of luck, load him up, and we can have a look at what's going on there. Now, it's worth remembering, this is one particular user, okay? And I want them to only have access in my situation to one particular customer. So it's it's necessary that some filtering will go ahead and take place to limit that scope. So here we go. It's popped open. Okay, I'm definitely not taking the angle here that I'm going to teach people how to be great at creating Power Apps. It's definitely not my bag. I get away with kind of what you're seeing over here, and that's probably fine for the time being. But kind of more see this as me pitching a principal idea, and yeah, maybe it's got legs, maybe it hasn't. We will see. So what can I do in my app? What have I given that user access to? Well, straight away you only notice I've got the one customer icon over here, so it's just School of Fine Art that I've restricted them down to. I know that I'm logged in with that particular user. That's all good. I can see some invoices over here. They're all just for the School of Fine Art. Just to scroll through, so you can definitely see that's the case. But then we're also understanding here, okay, what's our balance? What are the details they've got logged against me at the moment with regards to address and such like. I also do have an edit icon, which I can go on to. When I go into the edit, then I add a cross and a tick. So with certain columns, fields, I have some level of editing capability. So you can see when I kind of hover over balance and balance due and nuts, I can't go and scrap a load of value off of that. But if I hover over something like address to and city and name and email address, then I do have scope to make some changes. So we can go ahead and conduct that activity. So yeah, okay, it says wrong address in here. Maybe we get rid of that, actually. Get rid of that piece of information because we don't have that as our second address line. And then actually go ahead and save that record out. You can see the sort of dots at the top there, moving over, loading it up. And that should finish the activity. Once it's finished getting the information again. Okay, there you go. Cool. That's finished. Probably my bad. That's us making a change directly on the app that we have access to exclusively. So what's going to happen with that? How did these elements of the puzzle which haven't yet been revealed, and we will get to momentarily. Let's tackle off the sort of bottom part, and then we'll think about the show and tell element of how this was assembled. So yes, we have a list of invoices. That's fine. good, like that. What does that mean? What can we do with it though? So this particular icon over here that has a hover point over it, so does this one here. And I want to be able to use this particular icon, which I did forget to put a tooltip against. But the idea here is I'll be able to send this over as a copy invoice. I can see all the different invoices. I had the complete intention of creating this so that I could view the document, but kind of ran out of time. Just to let everyone in on that. But let's go ahead and use this particular button because that is doing something right now. So that one is going to go ahead and kick off a Power Automate flow. And looks like Deborah's just received an email. That's going to contain what we want. It's going to have the particular invoice against it. I will caveat that before I jump onto it with the fact that there was a sort of a mini problem with regards to the authentication of the email. So when it actually does come into their Outlook, because it's from Deborah to Deborah, it's causing a little bit of a conflict. But you can still download the attachments and get hold of that, which is which is okay. I'll address that a little bit better later on, of course, but it's still possible to download this email itself, and that does contain the attachments inside of it. And that's a particularly nice part of the Business Central API, which we'll see taking place. Fine, so that's kind of the full scope of the app at this point in time. Do a little bit of editing of information. They can send themselves some copy invoices. That's about as good as it gets for our current B2B customer app. But how did we go ahead and get that going? So before we do that one, let's just see if our address change made its way in. Looks like it has actually. Address 2 is marked as 0. Yeah, that's the email address is still the same. So yeah, we're looking like that information did pass its way over, which is good. How are those things happening? So now I'm in Chrome and I'm with Eve Smith. So this is my tenant now, my user, and this is me in Teams and looking at the Power Apps extension within Teams. You haven't dropped into this one. This is where all the kind of magic happens with regards to how this story plays out. So we're going to go into the build section of this guy. At the moment in the builds area, we are only using the business-to-business channel. So we've only started to build out applications for that particular channel. That's how the split off happens within Power Apps for Teams. It's per channel. That kind of fits nicely, maybe reveals a little bit of why I was going for that model with regards to the Azure group and how that gets catered for. And inside of the build area, this is where you can end up seeing everything that's been created thus far with regards to what we want to do for our guest users in that Teams channel. And the scope inside of here is pretty good, actually. I had a total idea to do a chatbot as well, and maybe have query what's my current balance or something like that, and then it would tell you via the chatbot, which could be a nice one. But there's quite a few different things currently sat in the business-to-business area that are being used. So we've got some different Canvas apps over here, got some different connections to some different data, and yeah, some different flows and stuff that are in here as well. So we've got some cloud flows built out. The building experience itself is pretty good, actually. And yeah, we'll drop into that app that was created and show a few bits and pieces in there. But first, we'll kind of look at how the information is being broadcast over to the user and how that story works out. So the tables themselves, you can have those just have focus solely on the channel that you're working within, or you can kind of get them to be more like a global table. So this users one actually is more globally focused, so the entirety of Power Apps for Teams can access that one. But the customer one or something like that, or the vendor one, you could just have it isolated only to the business channel. I think in this scenario, I went for more of a stylistic choice and said, actually, customer and vendor, I might end up building a bunch of other apps that sit inside of other channels within my organization. And that's actually useful for them to have access to. So I've gone more for that kind of setup. If we look at management permissions, though, this is the kind of first quirky thing that's worth tackling off over here. The one we went into the app as Deborah Berger, our guest user, it was fine. It was reading all the information, and we could get going with what we wanted to do, and we could do the editing that we needed to do. That was all good in the hood. We're really happy with that one. We can see in our permissions area, we've got the ability to actually do it for a full member access. So that's more anyone who's in the organization, so within the tenant that I'm currently thinking about. And then we've got guests split off, and then there's also a facility for doing it for the entire group itself. So I actually found with this one, because that's the one that we're plugging into as Deborah, that it was nicer to actually give them the full access. When I was sort of dropping it into collaborate or reference only, I really wasn't seeing the information play out in the app at all. So what I went for as a result of that is more lockdown capabilities in the app itself. I think that just works out way better because you can definitively know, okay, that can't happen because I've taken that facility away directly in the app that gets built. Naturally, because these are Canvas apps, you start from a blank canvas, so it's easy to chuck these bits in once you've learned those things. So yeah, I did find applying this one worked out way better. So build out all the fields that you need over here. Just add them as the different columns that are required. But how does the information get in, and how do we get that moving? Well, in principle, that's happening with cloud flows. And this is the kind of case for all the different tables. So the tables themselves are built based on Dataverse, of course, at this point. And you get an environment built for you for that particular channel. So actually, if I wanted to go over into the main sort of Power Automate website to deal with these things, I could actually just change to this business to business channel, and I can create all of these. I don't have to do it inside of Power Apps for Teams if I didn't want to. So let's pick out a couple of these different ones. So I've got one for refreshing customers. I won't go into all of the different ones that are there, but everything that you see if we saw within the app, that's all being passed to Dataverse for Teams by a user that has access to Business Central. That's a really important point. I'm logged in as someone in my environment. I have access, so I have a license to Business Central, so I can go ahead and build these things out and make them take place. The other kind of thing there is even in the app that I created, the Canvas app, if I actually said, oh wait, I want the user to pull the data when they log in, then I'd have a problem because the guest user is not going to have access. So you kind of have to do the heavy lifting for the user that's going to have access to it. So I'm, as a full tenant user, I'll have access to all those different bits and pieces. So I'm kind of covered quite nicely. Now I've used a bit of a mixed bag on these Power Automate flows of the HTTP trigger. I'm not going to go into the full design length and breadth of these. It's probably not really for a functional session. But yeah, in general, I'm either using that to call Business Central API, or I'll use the dedicated connector, which sits inside of Power Automate. So high level story, what's going on? Well, every day I do a refresh of this because it's a table that I don't have to really care loads about because when I do an adjustment as the user did, it triggers a flow straight away, and then that just passes it to Business Central. So that's kind of done and dusted. That data's over there. That's where the data then lives. So what I've done with this one is I actually trash all the data that's inside of Dataverse, just so I don't have to sort of check, oh wait, do I have that one already? Okay, yeah, I do. Skip next one. Just seemed like more of a unnecessary story to go through. You could just blast the table, whack all the data out of it, and then repopulate it again with the fresh data that your guest user potentially has adjusted. The other thing with that, of course, is because I'm passing over balance and balance due, I want to make sure that that's the most up-to-date piece of information. And with that being a flow field, the data doesn't necessarily trigger in the same way. So you think about Business Central Power Platform connectors in general, you have the different trigger points that you can work with. And on change, something might happen, and then you blast that through. That's not necessarily taking place over here. So we'll iterate through whatever we get back from Business Central. That's what's happening in this one. So here's an API call taking care of that guy for us. And then that eventually adds new rows back into Dataverse again. So we get where we need to go on that front. So that's how all the data is getting in. Same thing for customers and what have we. And then we have it the other way around. So customers to Business Central. So again, my user, my tenant, not the guest user, is running the show here. So that's how this is able to happen. Only Eve Smith has direct connection to Business Central. So that's how it's able to take place. But what the guest user does have access to is anything in Dataverse. So this one's really basic. It's literally just a case of when something happens in Dataverse for Teams, whack it over into Business Central. Job done. Nice and easy. And we saw that playing out, so that's an easy one to go for. The invoices throws up a kind of different scenario. Mostly because I want to save the PDF so that I can then pass that PDF out into email later on. So sort of a few different ways to go about this one. He was doing it from a fresh start, and I would probably go for something like this, whereby when an invoice gets created, when a sales invoice is generated in Business Central, so Eve Smith has access to find out that information, then go ahead and blast that into Dataverse for Teams, and then my users get access to it. So that's going to be great from a one by one basis, and it'll handle that as needs be. I wasn't quite at that point because I was doing this from I'd already had a load of data, so I had to go for more of a manual type push on this one. So it was different flow to cater for that. So you can have different scenarios to go by depending on if you look to deploy this type of solution. And the principal thing to jump over to with this one is more about the PDF itself. That's what kind of the interesting thing with this one is. So I have kind of cut it up in a couple of different ways. Originally, I had all the data going into Dataverse, and it is stored there. That's how it's getting out with the email. But how does it get there in the first place? Well, there's a really good API call that you can use for this one. So kind of just highlighting the thing that's interesting. PDF document. So I can actually make a call to an API, and I'll just have to pass in whether it's a sales invoice, whether it's a purchase invoice, something like that. Give me the ID of it, and then just say I want it to be the PDF document of that, and it'll actually print a PDF for you and pass you back that file, which is really powerful and could be adopted on loads of different situations. And that's pretty much the only additional part to it. Tell it there's a PDF document content, and it just passes it all straight back over to you. Really nice one to go with. So you can store all of those for the user themselves. Now, that's a little bit of a harder one to do if you wanted it to be kind of like on demand, because you might be thinking, whoa, data-wise, that's going to get pretty big pretty quickly. I'm storing all the files. And yeah, I mean, that could, of course, be the case, and that might be a thing that stops you from doing it. Or you actually say, I'll keep all that information in a SharePoint site instead of in my Dataverse for Teams, because it might have a direct impact on loading time of each of the different records. So I kind of get that, but it's probably more necessary to kind of speed things up for the user, especially if guest user now, when they don't have direct access to Business Central to perform that task themselves. All has to be piggybacked off of a defined Business Central user. So let's have a look at the app itself and how I've gone about restricting it so that only the right user gains access to the right stuff. I also did start building out another app where you were able to add in colleagues, so that they could also have access to the app itself. So again, as the guest user, you would have access to this one, and when this loads up, we'll have really kind of one icon we want to focus on, and that would be adding in a user. And that would just open up a form for us to get the chance to populate. So what's the email address of that user? What's the customer number they may not know, of course. So this is why this app could be internally focused to your tenant as opposed to the guest itself. So again, a choice to be made in that sense. But I found this as a pivotal part of the overall build. Let's just jump into B2B customer app. Like I said, I'm not going to show you how to build the app from scratch, because it doesn't really lend itself to this length of session. Just more to illustrate the art of the possible with this one. And I'm kind of thinking of exclusive customers in this instance. You might grant this over to, again, because if they don't have Teams, then they can't do that quick switch around. And as an overall user experience, I think that's quite a nice thing to be able to have. They don't have to leave Teams. They can just drop into another environment. It's familiar. They kind of understand how Teams works already, so they'll be able to get done what they want to get done. Right. So we are now logged into the app with Eve. Let's look at how I managed to get the kind of like filtering facility going on so that they can't access other people's data, because that's kind of like the big thing here, right? I've only really left this sort of bit on the side just because I wanted to be able to see when I'm logged in as an internal user, because it might be, a guest user says, oh, I can't see this in my account. And you think, okay, well, I know that it's not directly Business Central, so the data might be different maybe. And I'll drop in and have a look. So as someone who is in the right tenant, they'd be able to see everything, and they could drop into any customer's record that sits inside of Dataverse. So in the main app trigger in the on start function, this is where we start to do the restrictive elements. It's very basic. So all we're doing is saying create a filter for me. So this is just a variable, and that's where our customer approved users table comes into play. So that app that we were looking at here, this is the customer approved users table, which is this exposing to us at present. So you have to be in that table to have access to the app in this scenario. If you're not, then you would just get a blank app, no data pulled. So quite important element of the build. Now all we're doing is we're saying, okay, go have a look in that table for me and find me the email, and it has to be for the user that's currently logged in. So in our situation, that right now is this user, so it's actually displaying me the email address. And if you go ahead and find that email address, then pass me back the customer number, and then that's what my filter is going to be. So I mean, yeah, you don't have to be a developer to understand what's going on there. It's just a formula that's doing something super quick and easy for us. Now, what about the fact that if I'm a internal user, like I am at the moment, I'm not going to be in that table, so it's going to come back with a blank customer filter, most likely, and it almost certainly is in this scenario. So what happens there? Well, if and this is a kind of a crude way of doing it, there's probably a few other ways, of course, but I'm just using an if statement to say, well, if the user email ends with my domain in the scenario, Expedition Demo 1, then I want you to set another variable for me. So these are really easy to think about and get going. Internal user is true or internal user is false. Now that ends up manifesting itself in one of our sort of galleries over here, where we're saying if they're an internal user false, then you need to actually be filtering by that customer filter that we've already set. So that's how the customer guest user who's logging in only sees their customer account from Business Central. And then for everybody else, if you are internal, like this one will be, then you get to see the full customer table, no restrictions whatsoever. So yeah, that's kind of that one going on. The kind of, yeah, let's just drop over back into slides then, I think, and wrap ourselves up a little bit. So what have we just seen over there? Well, it's mostly cloud flows that are going ahead and getting data from Business Central for us and whacking them over into Dataverse for Teams. So we decide what the customer ends up seeing. By and large, we're using the Business Central API directly to do all of these things. So no development needed in that sense. It's just a case of understand a little bit about how you get this field, and this field, and then stick it over into Dataverse for Teams. But you've got total control over what they're getting access to. The Canvas app itself is then just built off of those tables which you created and whacked loads of data into. The scope is as we see it in that sense. And yeah, that's how we done it for a particular customer scenario where the customer has access to two teams, and we can go ahead and jump into that world. There is the ability, of course, to create guest accounts anyway when they don't have teams. I've just very much gone for that overarching theme because the user experience is just so much easier. Already in teams, drop over into another teams, do what they need to do, and get going. If you, and I haven't got as far down the line with this one as possible, and maybe there's someone in the audience who has, which would be great, or someone that's watching afterwards, they can point me in the right direction if I've not discovered by now. But when you create a guest user, it passes over an email to you. I won't jump into it now. And that email then says, okay, log in here to the other environment. And when you get there, it tells you what apps that you might have access to. And I haven't quite figured out how to make it so that the app we just built is in there. That could be because it needs to be in full Power Apps potentially. Okay. Well, here are my contact details. If you like this session, lovely. It'd be nice to hear feedback if you didn't like the session as well, actually, because then it lets me know where I'm going wrong potentially. And I've got my blog site over there as well. So if you did like the content, then it could be that there's some other bits and pieces over there which satisfy. And kind of just thing to end on there is coming up. I've got this session, so later on in April, I'm going to be part of a panel of a bit of a split here. So it's going to be Business Central consultants, and one of them's Mary Thompson, MVP. And then we've also got some F&O, or FO as they've kind of been correcting me on lately. Some FinOps people, and we're going to do a little bit of a, which one should it be? It's the battle of the two ERPs. Who's doing what well? Who's doing things not so well? How do people come up with which one they should end up using? So over to everybody for questions if they have any.
Fantastic session, Josh. It's been really, really helpful. Can't see any question. Just Mohammed raised something there. Thanks, Josh, in advance. I hope we have a short session for custom connector.
Oh, custom connector. Yeah. So if that is of interest to you, you jump over to my site. I'll just jump back over onto the slides a second to bring that up again. Shouldn't be. So there we go. Yeah. So go jump over to my blog site. I've done a video on custom connectors. Bear in mind that the API frameworks just changed from Business Central. So actually working with custom connectors is way easier now. So in terms of like, you want to know how to create like API pages themselves. I mean, something I can do. I haven't actually blogged about it yet, but there's a bunch of people that have. If you have a search for Dimitri Katzen, he has a really good blog on that one. So I followed that a bunch of times to create API pages. And now because the connector for Business Central and Power Automate and Power Apps has changed, you can actually say, there's just like a really simple drop down now. You just say, oh, actually, I'm using a custom page, and then bang, you can start putting your custom page in. It's a whole lot better for sure. So you don't need to build out custom connectors for Business Central through the custom connectors suite in Power Apps, Power Automate anymore. If you do want to, then there's a video on my blog site. Just go to the video section and you'll see a link to it there.
Brilliant. That sounds good. Josh, is there any possibility you can actually share your contact details and your blog link as well? And if you can quickly spot that custom connector blog link as well, if you can post it to the chat window, that would be really helpful.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that right away.
Fantastic. We've still got 7 minutes to go for the next session. So if anyone has any question, please feel free to ask.
Oh, looks like I'm getting off lightly.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll ping over details now. Go ahead.
Fantastic. One question, Josh. If we have the Power Platform portal plugged into it, I assume it's via Dataverse. Is that correct? It's not directly plugging into Business Central database, isn't it? Because
so from an environment, you think about with Power Platform, it's all environment focused.
Correct.
So if you go over into that area, just on the regular sites, you can actually choose which environment that you work on. At the point of creating that channel for Teams, then it'll create me, I'm building my first table in Dataverse. It will then build me my environment, and I can jump into the regular sites, make.powerapps.com, and I can work in that environment. It's a little bit restricted when you do it inside of the Windows client for Teams and the web client. So you might want to do that sometimes for sure. But that's definitely doable.
And hopefully Microsoft will soon find a solution to expose a Canvas app through the portal. If that happens, then we got lots of flexibilities, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, the Canvas apps one's an interesting story though, because you've got I've seen one of my colleagues actually, Dan Kinsella, he's gone ahead and done some like a JavaScript control add-in, and then we've been able to have a Canvas app embedded inside of Business Central. A couple of people have done it as well. It's quite cool. But in my Scottish Summit session, I was talking about the fact that, you know what, you might want to be able to do this with the Power BI embedded elements. Okay, so what you end up doing there is you can create a Canvas app inside of Power BI, It's a little bit small in terms of the screen rendering and stuff, but for discrete scenarios, it's actually pretty decent. So I had one going in my Scottish Summit session, as I said. I'll put a link to my YouTube channel for that one if you want to see that one.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah. But I wonder, like, how the licensing will work out for that one, though, because it's a publicly
Well, because
open
Power
site.
BI licensing is by and large most tenants we find it's actually free, isn't it? So you get the free version. So it's not you're not actually having to pay for it because you're doing Power Apps in the context of Power BI. It's kind of wrapped into that one. Again, because it's much smaller. There's less that you can do with it. So I think that's a good reason why, if you were using proper Power Apps, then of course you get bigger screens, you can do it on the phone, etc., etc. So yeah, if you jump over to this particular URL here, that's the fully qualified URL I put in the chat window. That's that's the other videos I've done up to this point in time. Scottish Summit one's there. There's one for the custom connector. There's one to do with syncing master data with Power Automate, which can be good. And yeah, then some other bits and pieces that I did for BC Tech Talk.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Brilliant. That sounds good. So I don't think we have any more question. Has anyone got any question? We got 3 minutes to go for next session. Okay, looks like no questions. So just going to stop the recording and